He stood at the door with his bag already packed, and his face looked so calm it made my chest tighten. "I just want peace," he said, like it was the simplest thing in the world, like those 4 words explained everything, like they justified walking away from 12 years of marriage without a real conversation. I was still mid-sentence when he said it, still trying to ask him what was wrong, still trying to understand why he'd been so distant for weeks, but he just shook his head slowly. "You're too much," he added, and those words hit me harder than anything else. Too much, like my emotions were a burden, like caring about our marriage was somehow exhausting him. I opened my mouth to respond, but he was already turning the doorknob. "I need space to think," he said, without looking back at me. And then he was gone, just like that. No counseling, no compromise, no chance to fix whatever was broken. I stood there in the hallway, staring at the closed door, feeling like I couldn't breathe. And then I heard it, his phone buzzing in his jacket pocket that he'd left on the chair. I shouldn't have looked, but something made me walk over. The message preview lit up the screen. "Can't wait to see you tonight," it said, and my whole world tilted. I couldn't stop replaying that word in my head. Peace. He said it like I was the chaos in his life, like I was the storm he needed to escape from. But what had I done except love him, except try to keep our home running, except ask him to talk to me when he started pulling away? I thought about all the nights I'd cooked dinner while he scrolled through his phone in silence, all the times I'd tried to plan date nights and he'd said he was too tired, all the conversations where I'd asked what was wrong and he'd said nothing with that flat expression that made me feel crazy for even asking. He'd been emotionally checked out for months, and I'd been trying so hard to reach him, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong, trying to be less needy, less emotional, less of whatever too much meant. And now he wanted peace, as if the problem was me and not the fact that he'd stopped trying. I sat on the couch in the silent house and realized something that made my stomach hurt. He hadn't just decided to leave today, he'd been planning this. He'd been slowly disconnecting while I desperately tried to hold us together. And I'd been so focused on saving our marriage that I hadn't noticed he'd already let it go. The house felt wrong without him. Not in the way I expected. It wasn't just empty, it was revealing. He'd taken his clothes and his laptop and his favorite mug, but he'd left everything else. Left the bills on the counter, left the broken cabinet he'd been promising to fix for months, left the responsibility of explaining to our friends and family why he was gone. I walked through each room seeing all the things he'd abandoned, not just his marriage, but his share of our life. And then I found the folder. It was in his desk drawer, tucked under some old papers. Bank statements from an account I didn't know existed, printouts of apartment listings, a consultation confirmation with a lawyer dated 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. He'd been planning his exit for 3 weeks, while still sleeping in our bed, still saying good morning, still letting me believe we had a chance. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. He'd been so methodical about it, so calm and calculated, and I'd been completely blindsided. I thought about that packed bag, how quickly he'd been able to grab it and leave, and I realized he must have packed it days ago, maybe even weeks, just waiting for the right moment to walk out. He texted me 2 days later. "I need you to understand, I didn't cheat." And I stared at that message for a long time. He didn't ask how I was doing, didn't apologize for leaving the way he did, didn't acknowledge that I might be hurt or confused. He just needed me to understand that he wasn't a cheater, as if that was the only thing that mattered, as if leaving without warning was fine as long as he hadn't physically betrayed me yet. I typed and deleted 5 different responses before finally writing back, "Then what is this about?" And his reply came fast, too fast, like he'd been waiting. "I'm just exhausted. I need time to figure out what I want. You're always so intense, and I can't handle it anymore." And there it was again, me being too much, me being the problem. His explanation felt practiced, like he'd rehearsed these lines, like he'd been preparing exactly what to say if I questioned him.
I wanted to scream at him through the phone, wanted to list everything I'd done to try to make him happy, wanted to ask him when exactly caring about my husband became a character flaw. But I didn't. I just put the phone down and let him think his story made sense, because arguing with someone who'd already rewritten history was pointless. My friend Amanda called, and her voice sounded careful in that way that meant she had bad news. "I need to tell you something," she said, and I already knew it wouldn't be good. She'd run into my husband at a coffee shop and overheard him talking to someone, describing our marriage, describing me. "He said you were controlling," Amanda told me quietly. "He said you couldn't handle him having his own life, that you made everything a crisis." And I felt something cold settle in my chest. He was rewriting our story, making himself the victim, making me the villain. Other friends started acting strange after that, asking careful questions about how I was doing, tiptoeing around topics like they'd heard something they weren't sure was true. I realized he'd been planting seeds for weeks, maybe even months, telling people his version before I even knew there was a version to tell, painting me as unstable so that when he left, everyone would understand, would nod sympathetically and say they'd seen it coming, would take his side without question. And the worst part was that it was working. I could see it in their faces, the doubt, the wondering if maybe I really was too much, if maybe he really did need peace from whatever I'd been putting him through.
I started noticing things I'd been too trusting to see before. Late-night texts that he'd angle his phone away from when I walked by. Notifications he'd silence quickly with explanations about work stress. Names I didn't recognize on our shared streaming accounts. Someone called Melissa had been watching shows at odd hours, shows I knew he wasn't watching with me. I checked our phone bill online and my stomach dropped. Hundreds of texts to a number I didn't know. Calls that lasted 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, all while he'd been telling me he was too tired to talk. The timeline didn't match anything he'd told me. He'd said he just needed space recently, just needed time to think. But these messages went back 4 months. 4 months of someone else getting the attention I'd been begging for. 4 months of him building something with someone else while letting what we had crumble. I sat there staring at the evidence, feeling stupid for not seeing it sooner, for believing him when he said nothing was wrong, for thinking I was the problem when really he'd just found someone else and was too cowardly to admit it. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but I heard his voice through the apartment wall. We lived in a complex where sound traveled, and he'd apparently forgotten that when he stepped outside to take a call. His voice was different, softer and lighter, almost playful in a way I hadn't heard in years. "I miss you too," he said, and I froze. "It's been harder than I thought, but I'm handling it. Just need a little more time." And then he laughed, actually laughed, a real, genuine sound that used to be mine. I moved closer to the window and heard him say, "She doesn't suspect anything. I told her I just needed space, and she believed it." And something inside me cracked. She. There was a she. There had always been a she, and I'd been so busy trying to fix myself that I hadn't seen what was right in front of me. He'd been having an affair, emotional or physical or both, and he'd left me claiming he needed peace, claiming I was too much, when really he just wanted to be with someone else without the guilt of admitting it. I stepped back from the window shaking, and I made a decision right then. I was done chasing him, done trying to understand, done making excuses for someone who was lying to my face. I stopped texting him first, stopped calling to ask about bills or paperwork or anything else. When he texted me, I'd respond hours later with short answers, no emotion, no questions, just facts. He asked if I was okay, and I said fine. He asked if we could talk, and I said maybe later.
I stopped performing the role of devastated, abandoned wife and just went quiet, and something shifted. He started texting more frequently, asking what I was doing, if I was home, why I wasn't answering faster. There was an edge to his messages now, an urgency that hadn't been there before. "Are you ignoring me?" he wrote one night, and I almost laughed, because for months I'd begged for his attention, and now suddenly my silence bothered him. I didn't explain myself, didn't give him the satisfaction of knowing how much he'd hurt me. I just existed separately from him, and apparently that was unsettling. He'd expected me to fall apart, to beg him to come back, to prove that I was exactly the chaotic emotional mess he'd described to everyone. But I wasn't giving him that. I was giving him exactly what he'd asked for: peace.
I stopped asking questions about where we stood, stopped trying to schedule conversations about our future, stopped reacting to his vague responses and mixed signals. I just let him exist in whatever space he'd claimed to need. And the change was immediate. He started showing up at the apartment unannounced, just grabbing some things I forgot, he'd say, but his eyes would scan the room like he was looking for evidence of something. Evidence that I'd moved on, maybe, or evidence that I was falling apart, but there was nothing to find, just me living my life quietly without him. He'd linger in the doorway, asking random questions. "Have you been eating okay? Are you sleeping? Are you talking to anyone?" And his concern felt hollow, because where was this care when I'd been begging for it? I'd answer simply, "I'm fine," and he'd look frustrated, like that wasn't the right answer, like he needed me to be not fine so he could feel less guilty about what he'd done. One night he said, "You seem different," and I just nodded. "You wanted peace," I reminded him. "I'm giving it to you." And his face fell in a way I didn't expect. His texts became more frequent and more desperate. "Why aren't you fighting for us?" he wrote at 2 a.m, and I stared at that message, feeling something like disbelief. He'd left without warning. He'd refused counseling. He'd told everyone I was the problem, and now he was upset that I wasn't fighting. Fighting for what exactly? For someone who'd already given up? For someone who was probably texting another woman while questioning why I wasn't chasing him? I didn't respond that night, and by morning there were 3 more messages. "I thought you loved me. This feels wrong. Can we please talk?" And I finally understood what was happening. He didn't want peace. He'd never wanted peace. He wanted control. He wanted to be the one who left, the one who made decisions, the one who got to keep me waiting while he figured out what he wanted. But my silence, my acceptance, my refusal to play the role he'd assigned me, it was breaking whatever script he'd written in his head. I wrote back finally, "You left because you wanted space. I'm giving you space. What exactly do you want from me?" And he didn't answer for hours, because he didn't actually know. I hired someone to look into our finances, and what they found confirmed everything. Money transferred to accounts I didn't have access to, credit cards I didn't know existed, payments to an apartment across town, and then the name, Melissa, the same name from the streaming account, the same name from the phone records. She was real, and she'd been real for a while. They sent me screenshots of social media posts, her at restaurants I recognized, wearing a scarf I'd bought him for Christmas, talking about finding unexpected happiness. My investigator found the lease, both their names on it, signed 2 months ago. 2 months. He'd been living a double life for 2 months while still coming home to me, still sleeping in our bed, still letting me cook dinner. I felt sick, but I also felt weirdly calm, because now I knew, now I had proof that none of this was in my head, that I wasn't too much or too emotional or too anything. He was just a liar. When I confronted him over text, he tried to minimize it. "It's not what you think. We're just friends. I needed someone to talk to because you were so overwhelming." And I almost laughed. Even with evidence, he was still trying to gaslight me. He called me crying, actual tears in his voice.
"You're twisting everything," he said. "I never meant to hurt you. You just don't understand the pressure I was under." And I listened to him blame me for his affair, blame me for his lies, blame me for every choice he made. He said I'd pushed him away with my expectations, that Melissa understood him in ways I never had, that if I'd just been calmer, more supportive, less needy, none of this would have happened. And I let him talk, let him spin his version where he was the victim and I was the villain. And when he finally stopped, I said something that surprised even me. Right, I said quietly. "You're absolutely right." And the line went silent. He didn't expect that. He expected me to argue,
To defend myself, to give him the fight he was trying to provoke. "What?" he said, and I repeated it. "You're right. This is my fault. I should have seen who you really were a long time ago." And then I hung up, and I blocked his number, and I stopped engaging completely. Because arguing with someone who refused to take responsibility was pointless. He'd made his choices, and now he'd have to live with them. I started rebuilding in ways that had nothing to do with him. I called a lawyer and started the separation paperwork. I changed the locks. I opened my own bank account and moved my money. I reached out to friends I'd lost touch with and started accepting invitations I'd turned down because he'd never wanted to go. I signed up for a class I'd been interested in for years. I rearranged furniture and repainted walls. I made the apartment mine, not ours, just mine. And slowly I started feeling lighter. People noticed. Amanda said I seemed different, stronger somehow. And I realized I'd been so focused on saving my marriage that I'd forgotten to save myself. I'd made myself smaller, trying to be what he needed, less emotional, less demanding, less present, and it still hadn't been enough, because the problem was never me. The problem was that he wanted someone to manage his guilt while he did whatever he wanted, and I wasn't willing to do that anymore. He tried to reach me through friends. "Just talk to him," they'd say. "He seems really sorry." But sorry wasn't enough. Sorry didn't erase months of lying. And I was finally done accepting apologies as substitutes for actual change. He showed up at my door looking tired, and he said the words I'd once desperately wanted to hear. "I made a mistake," he said. "Leaving was impulsive. I'm confused about everything." And he looked at me like I was supposed to comfort him, supposed to tell him it was okay and we could figure it out together. But I wasn't confused. I was the clearest I'd been in months. "What do you want?" I asked, and he fumbled for an answer. "I don't know. I think I rushed into this. Maybe we gave up too fast." And there it was. The maybe, the uncertainty, the expectation that I'd wait around while he figured out what he wanted, like I was a backup plan he could return to if his new life didn't work out. I looked at him standing there and felt nothing. No anger, no love, no hope. Just exhaustion. "You wanted peace," I reminded him. "You got it." And he shook his head. "That's not fair," he said, and I almost laughed. "What's not fair?" I asked. "That you have to live with the consequences of your choices?" And he didn't have an answer for that either. He started talking about us with nostalgia, remembering good times, bringing up memories like they could erase everything that had happened. "Remember when we went to the beach?" he'd text. "Remember our first apartment? Remember when things were good?" And at first I ignored it, but eventually I responded. "I remember," I wrote. "I also remember you leaving. I remember Melissa. I remember you telling everyone I was controlling." And he went quiet for a day before trying a different approach. "Can we start over?" he asked. "Can we try again? Forget everything and just try?" And part of me, the part that had loved him for 12 years, wanted to say yes,
wanted to believe people could change, but the bigger part, the part that had been hurt and lied to and gaslit, knew better. Start over how? I asked. With you still seeing her? With you still thinking I'm too much? With none of the actual problems addressed? And he said he'd end things with Melissa, said he'd go to counseling, said he'd do whatever it took, but his promises felt empty because I'd heard them before, because I knew he'd say anything to get what he wanted in the moment.
I set boundaries that I should have set months ago. We can communicate about the separation paperwork, I told him, but that's it. No random visits, no late-night texts about feelings, no using me for emotional support while you figure out your life. And he looked hurt. You're being cold, he said, and I shook my head. I'm being clear, I corrected. You wanted peace, and now you're upset that I'm peaceful. And I meant it. I wasn't fighting with him anymore, wasn't crying or begging or trying to understand. I was just maintaining distance, and apparently that was worse for him than any argument would have been. He tried to provoke reactions, sending me long messages about how I'd changed, how I wasn't the person he married, how my coldness proved I'd never really loved him. But I didn't take the bait. I just responded to necessary questions and ignored everything else. And slowly, his messages became more panicked. Please, just talk to me like you used to, he wrote. I feel like I don't know you anymore. And I wanted to tell him that the person he'd known was someone I'd created to make him comfortable, but that person was gone now. I found out through mutual friends that things with Melissa weren't going well. The excitement had worn off and reality had set in. She wasn't peaceful. She was demanding, asking where their relationship was going, why he was still texting his ex-wife, whether he was actually serious about her or just using her. He'd apparently told someone he felt trapped, that it wasn't what he expected, that Melissa had changed once he'd fully committed. And I felt nothing about it. No satisfaction, no sympathy, just detachment. He tried to use it as an opening. You were right about everything, he texted. I made a huge mistake. I want to come home. And I stared at that message for a long time. He wanted to come home, not because he loved me or valued our marriage, but because his other option hadn't worked out, because he was realizing that leaving had consequences he didn't like. This isn't your home anymore, I wrote back. You gave that up when you left. And he called immediately, his voice desperate. Please don't do this. We can fix it. I know we can. But I wasn't interested in fixing anything with someone who'd only come back because his backup plan had failed. We met for coffee, and he asked the question I knew was coming. Is there any hope for us? And I thought about it honestly before answering. Hope for what? I asked. For you to come back and leave again when things get hard? For me to spend my life wondering when you'll decide I'm too much again? For us to pretend the last 6 months didn't happen? And he looked down at his cup. I just want another chance, he said quietly, and I felt sad for him, sad for us, sad for what we'd lost. But I also felt clear. Peace isn't absence, I told him. It's not just quiet or space or running away from problems. It's clarity. It's knowing who you are and what you want. And you don't have that. I paused. And honestly, neither did I until you left. He tried to argue, tried to say he knew now, that losing me had taught him everything he needed to know. But it was too late for lessons, too late for epiphanies, too late for promises. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said, and I meant it. But it's not going to be with me. And I stood up to leave while he sat there looking lost. I finalized the separation without drama or revenge. I didn't try to take more than I deserved, didn't spread stories about what he'd done, didn't turn our friends against him. I just quietly ended what we'd had and moved forward. He sent a final email weeks later, long and rambling, apologizing and explaining and asking for forgiveness, and I read it once and then deleted it, Not out of anger, but because I didn't need it anymore. Didn't need his explanations or his guilt or his version of events. I'd made peace with what happened, real peace, the kind that comes from accepting truth instead of running from it. My friends said I was handling everything so well, too well, maybe, asked if I was really okay or just pretending, and I told them honestly, I was okay, not because the situation didn't hurt, but because I'd stopped trying to control things I couldn't change, stopped trying to make someone love me the way I deserved, stopped setting myself on fire to keep someone else warm. And that clarity, that acceptance, it was more peaceful than any relationship had ever been. Looking back, I understand now what really happened. He didn't leave because I was too much or because he needed peace. He left because he was uncomfortable with vulnerability, with real intimacy, with the work that relationships require. And instead of facing that discomfort, he ran, blamed me for it, found someone new who felt easy because she didn't know him yet, didn't challenge him yet, didn't require anything real from him yet. But peace isn't found in absence. It's found in acceptance, in truth, in doing the hard work of being honest with yourself and others. And he wasn't capable of that. Maybe he never had been. I spent so long thinking I was the problem, trying to be less emotional, less present, less myself, when the real problem was that I was trying to build something real with someone who only wanted something easy. He said he wanted peace, and I finally gave it to him. The peace of not having to pretend anymore, not having to maintain a lie, not having to manage my expectations or his guilt. And when he realized what that peace actually meant, when he saw that it included losing me forever, he panicked. But by then, it was too late. I'd found my own peace, and it didn't include him. He wanted peace, he just didn't expect it to mean losing me forever.